Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's event, Business Agility and Agile Audit. My name is Manola Hunt, and I lead our RGP office here in Las Vegas. Thank you so much. First of all, I have a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to go through with you. First of all, we are recording this event, and a link will be emailed out to you afterwards. We encourage you to participate during our discussion by submitting questions and comments via the chat. If we're unable to answer your questions during our discussion, we will do so afterwards offline. If you're interested in receiving CPE credit for today's event, please make sure you stay on for 50 minutes, respond to 3 of the polling questions, and complete the survey that will appear at the end of our event. With that, I'll hand it over to Ian to get our discussion started. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thanks, Manola. Hi, everyone. I'm Ian Burnett. I'm VP Internal Audit and Compliance with RGP. So I report up to our Head of Risk and Compliance, part of our Advisory and Project Services area. So excited to bring you this content today about business agility and Agile Audit. And I'm joined by Toby DeRoche, who's going to be kicking things off in a second. And Bill Liberto is also joining us as a man of great experience with Agile as well, so he'll chime in as appropriate, and he'll also be monitoring the chat area within the presentation as questions come in. Feel free to send those in, and we do have time at the end here to take a look at your questions and reply back. So I hope you enjoy this, and I'll turn it over to Toby to introduce himself, and we'll get going. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Toby DeRoche. I'm going to be taking you through some of the basics of Agile and business agility just to get us started. And then we're going to go back to Ian, and Ian's going to take us deeper into Agile Audit. My background's all internal audit. I work as an internal audit consultant with RGP, with Ian, really working with organizations who are looking to make different kinds of transformations. And Agile Audit is one of the biggest ones that we're talking about right now. It's probably one of the most significant changes we've seen inside of audit for a very long time. Let's go ahead and get started. I want to start you off with a quote. Whenever we're thinking about business agility, it helps if we start to think about this from a high level point of view. So the first thing we want to show you, it's a quote from Bill Gates. He says that success today requires the ability and drive to constantly rethink, reinvigorate, react, and reinvent. And what's good with this quote from Bill Gates is that it's not about any one thing. And when we start thinking about Agile, many of us go to an IT world because we might know that's where it came from. But when he's saying that success requires agility, he's saying it in a very broad sense, and he's right. And we've seen a lot of organizations that have adopted this process now. So let's take a look at where this actually came from. I'm going to take a step back in history to see how we got to where we are now. Really what we see is that agility has been a work in progress. It's something that we were leading up to for a very long time. Back in the 90s, it started off with like lean manufacturing. You may be familiar with some of the things that Toyota was doing with just-in-time operations. This then went through some of the total quality management. It went through Scrum methodology till we got to the early 2000s. So it's about 20 years ago. It's actually just over 20 years ago now, because this came out in like February of 2001, that the Agile Manifesto came together. And this is where a group of IT professionals came together to rethink how they were working. We got tired of having to produce things that by the time it was ready, it wasn't what people needed. And so they wanted to rethink how we were actually building things and developing things. This grew up until the point where we are now over the last 20 years, to the point where we understand now that Agile is truly a mindset that we can apply to different business operations. And that's how we get to the point where we can even talk about Agile Audit, that we now can see how we can both adopt and adapt this process to really work for us and the way that we need to. Agile helps us mature so that we can react quickly to the things that matter most. We want to be able to meet changing markets and changing demands from our customers. And from us on the audit side, we know that our customers are the audit committee, the board, the organization as a whole, all the shareholders, all the stakeholders. So for us to be able to provide what they need in the time that they need it, we have to change the way that we're working and the way that we think, to change our mindset to be more agile. So then we lead to the question of, well, what is business agility really? The simplest way that we can talk about it is to say it's a new way of working. It's really going to combine an agile mindset and some of the agile tools that we need. The agile mindset, it's putting value first. It's increasing collaboration, decentralizing decision-making so that it's closer to the teams that actually have to make the decisions. It's really focusing on the outcomes and making sure that we're getting to things in the right time. Then we have a whole set of tools that we can use. Some of the agile tools and some of the terminology you might hear us throw around a bit is talking about things around Scrum, Kanban boards, lean processes. You'll hear us talk about these things as we talk about agile. All of these are just tools for us to use so that we can take that mindset that we're adopting and make it real, make it practical. And you'll see some examples of that as we go through this presentation. So when Ian's talking about Agile Audit specifically, he's going to show you examples of how this actually looks. But when we think about Agile and that Agile Manifesto, some of the bigger elements that came out of it, they really defined 4 values and 12 principles. And I want you to see what these actually are. So on the value side of this, the way that they're actually drafted is something over something else. So we look at these values as we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So what we're saying is not that the processes and tools aren't important, but that we should value the interactions between people more, because that's where decisions come from. That's where action comes from. That we value working products and services over comprehensive documentation. This is one of those tricky ones that people have a bit of a misconception about, that Agile means we don't document. And I know for myself as a lifelong career auditor, no documentation scares me. And just the concept of that freaks me out. But that's not what we're talking about. We're not saying it's not important, don't do it. We're saying that a working product is the goal. That's what we value most here. So our working product might be audit committee reporting packages that share insights with the board. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. We value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So we want to work with the individuals who are the ones who are setting the pace for us, setting where we're going to go, the directions, the corporate objectives, over format of a plan. We want to be able to respond to change over following that plan. So we're not going to shy away from the fact that changes are going to come in the world. And right now, honestly, this is probably the best time for us to have this conversation, because we all just lived through a year of constant change. So this is something that we all get now, is that we have to be able to respond to things. And these values are supported by principles. So the 12 principles that we have, these are ones that define things a bit more. They help us to really set the stage of that mindset of how we're going to be able to work. We want to be able to satisfy our customer. That's our highest priority. So we have to understand first in audit, who is our customer, so that we can actually work toward that goal of meeting their objectives for us and meeting expectations. We welcome change. This is one of the big shifts that we have to make. The idea of setting a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year audit plan in place and letting it go is just not going to work for us anymore. We have to be open to change, and we have to deliver frequently. So as we're thinking about our audit plan, our goal is to get results out more quickly. Results don't always just mean audit reports. Results, if we think about our customer base as being the board, we're getting those results to them more quickly. And we're working together with them and with all the business folks that are involved in the process. All of this is so that we are building trust and support among all of the coworkers and all the cohorts that are building all of this together, working not just with our own team, but working very hand in hand with the auditees. We work very closely and work face-to-face. One of the ideas here in the principles is that face-to-face interaction trumps all others. And again, that's tricky right now, right? Because we're in Zoom right now. And so we have to get used to working in these remote environments. We then get into things around our working products and services. That's our goal here. One of the underlying principles is that a working service, a working product, whatever that deliverable that we have, that's how we measure progress. Just getting the audit plan done isn't it? It's what came out of it. What was our actual product that we produced? And we want to be able to do this consistently and stably over time. So that's this sustainable development idea. This principle is saying that we need to be able to do this and keep going. It's not a one-time thing. We don't do it for a quarter and then stop. This is going to keep going. And while it's going to keep going, that's where this ninth one comes in. We want continuous improvement. We want to learn from our mistakes. We want to always continue to do things better. Number 10 is probably my favorite one. It's maintain simplicity. The way that the principle is actually written, it's that we want to have simplicity in everything that we do, and that simplicity is essential. This means that we don't go in with big, broad scopes. We don't overblow our plans. We go in with a very well-defined set of what we want to accomplish. And then once we have that, number 11 says we give it to a self-organizing team. We allow the team to make decisions right there on the front lines, right where they are, and we trust that our team can do it because we know that we have a good team. And then as we're doing all of this, we're constantly reflecting on what we've done, making adjustments. We're not going to ever just sit and rest. We've got a continuous improvement plan that we've put in place for ourselves, and we're going to consistently and constantly make adjustments to make it better. And it's these principles that when we talk about them, they make sense. We know that this is something that can work for us in audit. We know that this is something that will help us overall. And there's a lot of benefits that come from Agile Audit. Just to give you a few, we're going to have much better alignment with management. We've been working toward this. Some have done a better job than others, but we want to be very closely aligned in our audit plan with management's strategic plan, with the actual, if we're in a corporation, with their corporate goals and objectives. We want to work toward the same things management is. We don't want to work and spend our time on auditing that they don't care about. We want shorter cycle times. We can't have year-long, 3-year-long audit plans. We have to get our cycle time shorter so that as we're going through these iterations, we're delivering results much more timely. We're prioritizing the things that matter most. And that means that not the things that matter most to us in audit, the things that matter most to management. We're part of the organization to help them, make the right decisions and give them the insights they need. So we have to be able to prioritize things that matter to them and then give them the insights that they need. And that's one of the biggest benefits of this, is that the focus of what we're doing totally shifts, and we're focusing completely on the insights we provide to management. We see increases in productivity because we've got much tighter scopes. We understand exactly what we're going in to do, and we're not doing these end-to-end process reviews. We're very targeted in this way of working. And then we also have, just by nature of what we're doing, an increase in quality. Because you saw in those principles that we just went through, there was this reflective aspect to it where we're looking back on what we did, and we're taking that and we're applying it. We're making it something that's part of our normal audit work, to always go back and focus on quality. And with that, we get to our first polling question. First polling question is this: what is business agility? Looks like the poll's launched. You guys should be able to vote now. Your options are the future of how all business should operate, the ability to respond quickly to market changes, ability to compete and thrive in the digital age, or not sure, or NA. About 75% have voted.
Yeah, thank you for that overview, Toby. Very well done. And we'll, after the polling question here, we'll continue to take a little bit of a closer look into audit and how we apply these principles there and the Agile values that you spoke of. So
with the polling results, it looks like we've got about 68% have said ability to respond quickly to market changes. The others aren't wrong. Probably going to be the future of how most businesses operate. And it also does give us the ability to compete in this current age. But really what we're looking for is the ability to respond quickly. We want to be reactive to the things that matter the most. So that's really what we're looking for with this. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ian, who's going to take us deeper into Agile Audit.
Thanks, Toby. Okay, so we'll take a look at how we take all these Agile principles and values and port it over to audit more specifically. I think we have some folks on the session today who are from internal audit, and certainly a lot of finance and accounting people who've probably interacted with internal audit in their careers. And so hopefully you guys are probably quite familiar with some of the, let's say, more traditional internal audit approaches through that interaction. So what we'll do is do a little bit of comparison to taking Agile principles into audit, as well as look at how it's a little bit different from more traditional audit methodologies and how things might have been done more so in the past. Okay, so on this slide, we're really taking a look at the Agile process as it was developed really more so for the business and the IT DevOps space. And it kind of starts with, if you think about an IT development type of approach, it's about building features and functionality for end users. And so those typically get broken up into stories. So you can see there's story 1, story 2, story 3. And that list of stories gets pulled into what's called a product backlog. So those features, if you will, are prioritized, and then the Agile team working on that will take those stories and features and bucket those into development sprints. So you might have heard of the term a sprint backlog, but that is in an IT DevOps world how Agile brings IT development to life through this sprint process. So these features or stories are developed in manageable buckets, if you will, that can be worked on by the development team over what's called a sprint, right? And so over 2 to 4 weeks, a team is going to be working on those features and having a lot of interaction with the end users through what is called a daily Scrum. And that's basically every day there's going to be some kind of a collaborative session between the development team and the end users to really talk through how is it going, how is this development coming along, and sharing in a very collaborative and transparent way the progress that's being made and getting feedback from the end users. And then at the end of this whole process, you're going to have some new functionality that gets rolled out, and through that end state is when the value is really delivered to the end user. So I want to just set the context here of laying out, in traditional Agile for the business and the DevOps space, this is kind of what it looks like. So now what we're going to do is take that same approach and think through, well, how do we put these principles and terms, if you will, in some cases over to internal audit, and what does it mean? So if you think about some of the key Agile roles in DevOps, you'll have a product owner, and this is the person that's really kind of overseeing the entire process of development, what's happening there, and making sure that value is being delivered through this Agile Scrum process. So they're overseeing the work of the team and helping that team prioritize stories and organizing the team to develop using the Scrum methodology, those sprints to actually do development. So what does this mean for audit? So you can think of that product owner as being your audit plan owner, which is typically going to be a chief audit executive or a director of internal audit. And you can think of them as the people that own the plan that are helping to prioritize the activities of the audit team. And as we'll see, using similar principles to DevOps Agile, working through internal audit activities in an Agile way. In DevOps, you have a Scrum team. That is actually the development team that's working through that Scrum process and working on developing code or system functionality to deliver the features that the end users are looking for. So in audit, you can think of this as your Agile audit team. So it's going to be made up of a group of audit professionals. Maybe it's 3 to 5 folks. Some will be shared resources such as IT subject matter professionals, or perhaps you have data analytics specialists or people very skilled in RPA tools and technology that could help multiple audit Scrum teams at once. So that's certainly something. There are definitely opportunities to have shared resources. But again, sort of 3 to 5 people on a Agile audit team is a good number, a very manageable number. And then in DevOps, we would have a Scrum Master. This is basically your team lead. And there's the concept that I think Toby touched on, the concept of servant leader, if you will. And this is making sure that the lead of the team, their job is to bring out the team's best work. They're there to take down impediments, reduce roadblocks, and really allow the team to leverage its skills in an optimal way and deliver the value to the end users. So in audit, this is going to be your audit leader, but because of this servant leader mentality, it may be a little bit different from what a traditional, more autocratic lead person might do. This person's job is to really be a coach, bring out the best work of the team, and really help put together a very transparent and collaborative process overall, and make sure that value is being delivered to end users for audit, which is going to be your management and auditees. Okay. So if you look at how does this work in Agile Audit, using a similar graphical depiction of a Scrum approach in audit, instead of talking about stories or features, we're really talking about risks. The value of Agile Audit is that everything is really risk-based. So I'm sure many of you, if you're familiar with public company filings, have seen the risk factors section of a 10K item 1A, which talks a lot about risks to an organization. It's a very transparent, obviously, document, being a public filing. So that is a great place to think about, what are the risks to an organization that really have a potential to impact a company or organization achieving its objectives. Now, certainly the things in the public filing may not be the only risks, but it's certainly a good starting point to think about, what are we really talking about? Because everything we do in Agile Audit, we really want to tie back to risks. So if we're going to add value in audit, we take those risks and basically prioritize them in an audit plan backlog. Again, the product owner, who is likely going to be the chief audit executive here, is going to be helping drive this process to figure out, okay, what should the team work on and in what order, and how are we going to compartmentalize these activities into audit sprints that can become manageable blocks of work that can be done in a time-boxed manner to deliver maximum value. So similar to how we had sprints in DevOps, we have sprints in audit. And again, it's going to be some kind of a time-boxed activity. It could be 2 to 4 weeks. Sometimes it may be a little bit longer, up to 6 weeks. And you're going to have an audit team of, as I mentioned, probably 3 to 5 people that are working on a very specific set of risks in that audit sprint. And again, we want this to be highly transparent. We want this to be highly collaborative with our auditees. So this concept of the daily Scrum certainly applies. And we're going to have a lot of frequent interaction with our auditees. And in some ways, you could argue that it's almost a little bit more work on the part of the auditees, in the sense that they have to be engaged in this process. But the trade-off is that there's a significant increase in collaboration and transparency. And as Toby indicated, internal audit, in using this method, is able to provide value much more rapidly back to the auditees because of that collaborative nature of the work and the transparent way in which it is being done. And at the end of the audit, we are going to produce output, which is really insights about what are we seeing, how well is the company addressing the risks or not, and we're going to provide observations and recommendations. However, because of the collaborative nature of the approach that we've been using with the daily Scrum, there won't be surprises. We will have been communicating with our auditees throughout, and we're getting their buy-in on what the audit is uncovering from an issues and risks standpoint. And we're really collaboratively working on making sure that everything is understood, and management really begins to assemble management action plans and figure out remediation strategies for issues that are identified as the audit is progressing. So from that standpoint, it's a highly productive way of doing this type of work. And because of the collaborative nature of the way that we deliver it, we get a lot of buy-in on the part of the auditees. So let's move along here to, thinking about, here we're going to look at some of the terminology around, again, going back to DevOps and how does this compare to audit. So I'll just step through some of these definitional areas. Program increment in DevOps is really, what you're trying to achieve in terms of value at a high level through that Scrum process in DevOps. Objectives are going to be the more technical goals and business objectives that program increment is trying to deliver for end users. And stories, again, are features that you're trying to deliver to end users with the development sprint process. And then the sprint is basically the time-boxed, focused activity to deliver the value through that development effort. So now looking at internal audit, using the same approach, the program increment becomes the audit plan. The objectives are still objectives in terms of delivering certain goals and outputs. The stories, which are features in DevOps, become the risks. So everything is focused on the risks. And the sprint is the actual audit activity that we're working through to deliver that value. Okay, so we have another polling question. What is an ideal frequency for a risk assessment? Options are annual only, annual with some updates, every 6 months, at least quarterly, continuous, or not sure. So I would say that while you're answering that, I'll just point out that 2020 was certainly a crazy year, and some of that same environment obviously has carried over into this year. And I don't think there was ever a time when people recognized the value of being agile in audit and having an agile mindset in the way that they do things. We at RGP hosted some chief audit executive roundtables last year and got a lot of good conversation going among groups of CAEs, and really great conversation, and everybody certainly recognized the value of really assessing risk at a much higher frequency because of COVID and what happened last year. So here it looks like we have the results now, and the answer is continuous 50%. That's a good answer. You guys are following along with the mindset here. We were looking for at least quarterly as the answer, but continuous is a good answer as well. I think it's really demonstrative of the fact that in agile auditing, it's all about risk and really having much higher frequency risk assessment and visiting those risks on a much higher frequency basis than what we did in traditional auditing. Okay, so I'm going to close this. Okay, so when it comes to implementing, let's take a look at some things. So in Agile Audit, some things don't change that much. And, as in traditional audit, we still have planning, execution, and reporting activities that have to happen. That's really a well-structured way of working through the process. But it's really more so about the emphasis. So in planning, again, it all really comes back to risk assessment and making sure that the activities that we focus on in Agile Audit are meaningful in terms of they're addressing risks that we care about. And, we're going to organize our activities in a way that we create that backlog of risks and plan audit activities in the areas that are going to have an impact, where the value of the insights that we're able to produce in an audit are going to be valuable for our stakeholders and our auditees. And, you know, the team scheduling is going to be arranged by the CAE in a manner that puts the best team together to address the audit sprints that we're going to work through based on the risks associated with that audit sprint. So as I mentioned, oftentimes you're going to have some subject matter experts plugged into the audit sprints to make sure that you're leveraging technology or data analytics or something along those lines, or perhaps it's, you know, some other functional knowledge that may be very helpful for that team. And, you know, it could be a combination of, you know, in-sourced auditors combined with some subject matter experts from a co-sourcing partner. That's certainly a viable way to go about it. And then once that team is assembled, even when it comes to execution, we're still focused on risk, right? So we're prioritizing our activities around the risks associated with that audit sprint and making sure that everything we do is risk focused. We have an iterative mindset where we're working through elements of the audit plan, but having that high frequency communication and collaboration with our auditees through the daily stand-ups. And we're also doing iterative reporting, right? Because we want to feed back to our auditees insights quickly and be able to provide value to them so that they can start to think about the issues that are being identified and how they'll remediate the issues or address those issues to make sure that the overall control structure to address risks is optimized. And then when it comes to reporting, you know, we will have been reporting in some manner throughout the audit and giving feedback and value to our stakeholders as we work through it. And really, it's the concept of management reporting on demand. This is something that audit committees are increasingly expecting from teams that work in an agile way, is that we should be able to, at any given moment, really provide insights back to stakeholders, including the audit committee. And of course, you know, with audit committees, they do have an expectation of more formal reporting on a quarterly basis, and we're still going to do that. But it really becomes a situation where we're focused more on substance than we are on form. I'm sure some of you might have seen situations where several weeks or multiple weeks can go by where people are putting together very fancy glossy reports, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's really about the insights. And you can think of reporting as just the vehicle to deliver those insights. So that's a key takeaway that you might want to think about. Okay, so let's go on here. So as far as planning, just a couple things to think about as far as comparing traditional audit to Agile audit. Typically what we see in traditional auditing is the entity-based audit universe, which is, you know, companies sometimes think, you know, we've got to, at least on a cycle or rotational basis, look at every corner of the organization. You know, we've got to go to every location, we've got to look at every business process and so on. And that's really more of a traditional entity-based audit universe. And those audit entities might be subject to some kind of a subjective ranking to come up with some level of prioritization to figure out what's a reasonable rotation and frequency to do those audits. Oftentimes, the horizon for traditional audit risk assessment can be a year or more. And emerging risks are not always well represented in that approach. In Agile auditing, it's really all about having a risk-based audit universe and focusing on those risks that are going to be most impactful for an organization trying to achieve its business objectives and its strategy. So that's why we had that polling question about how often should we really be going back and revisiting risks. And at least quarterly makes sense if we're really implementing a good, solid Agile audit approach, because we know that things change. Last year, we saw it more than ever, but I don't think the pace of change is going to slow down. And so certainly, you know, planning audit activities a year or 2 or 3 years out, it really doesn't have the same amount of value as it used to have. and therefore with the audit, the Agile audit approach, having a much shorter horizon on that risk outlook makes a lot of sense. So the audit plan then, which is reflective of the risks, really becomes more of a quarterly plan. And certainly these things can change even more frequently than that if needed. But quarterly is kind of a good horizon in terms of planning under the Agile method. Emerging risks are always considered, and we certainly can also scale to combine risk areas as necessary to make sure we get the right coverage based on what we know to be the risks. Okay, so we really kind of hit this already, but we certainly feel that the quarterly risk-based planning approach is the best way to do it. And, you know, Toby is a master of tools and templates, and certainly can provide additional value to anybody who wants to follow up with us and talk through in more detail how would we actually implement this in a pragmatic way. Okay, so let's go to another polling question. How often should the internal audit department, I can't see the question, sorry. How often should the internal audit department be able to produce audit committee insights in the way of reports? Oh, I'm going to correct what I said. I think we got our questions flipped. This question is, what is the internal audit department's main product? Okay, we're at 85%, getting up there, very good. What is the internal audit department's main products? We have 40% audit reports, 38% audit committee insights. Audit committee insights is actually the answer we were looking for. Again, it kind of goes back to what I was suggesting, that the reports are a tool. We still do reporting. We do it in a couple different forms depending on the audience, but the purpose of the report is to deliver insights. And so if you think about the end product being really that substance over form, delivering the insights is really the value that internal audit provides to its stakeholders. Okay, let's close this. Okay, so again, really just an illustration of quarterly risk assessment activities. We're going to do an initial assessment in Q1 likely, and then every quarter we're just going to come back, and we know we're going to have to do a refresh on that risk assessment activity. And one thing to think about too under this method is, as we know, a lot of Agile is about mindset, and one of the things that I'll encourage you to think about is that you have to get somewhat comfortable, or very comfortable actually, with the whole concept of it's okay if we're not auditing everything. As long as we're focused on the highest risks to the organization, that's really what matters. So thinking back to that entity-based audit approach in the more traditional method, where we're going to go to every location, every business function is going to get looked at. In Agile auditing, we may not do that. We may not go to every location. We may not look at every single business function in the audit department, because if it's not registering high on our risk assessment and we're not looking at it, we have to get comfortable with that. And we do get comfortable with that. Now, that's not to say that on a holistic basis across the enterprise, there could be other organizations that might be looking at some of those things, such as a compliance function, or some organizations have risk and control self-assessment. And some of these methods are probably perfectly appropriate for lower risk areas that internal audit may not be looking at, because it's just not high enough on their risk radar to invest that time. We're focused on the higher risks in audit, and other risks may be handled differently by other aspects of the company's overall governance approach. So when we think about risk assessment, the sources don't really change all that much. We still look at information from our financial reports. Most public companies are putting it right out there in that item 1A, as I mentioned. So they're telling the world, these are the risks that we're worried about, the things that could impede us from achieving our strategic objectives. We also are going to get inputs from senior management, interviews, surveys, things like that, understanding, what's changing in the organization from a product standpoint, what's changing from a systems and technology standpoint, what things do we need to think about there. And then we may go back also and look at completed audits and really think about, what did we see in that audit? What follow-up do we need to do? What emerging risks did we identify in a prior audit sprint that we didn't have, that we were not able to fully address in that sprint, but now we have them on an emerging risk radar. And as time goes by, we know that the risk associated with that area is increasing, so it gets elevated in our risk assessment. Okay, so just quickly looking at sort of the difference between traditional risk assessment, where it is entity-based. We're going to be, potentially breaking things down by department or function or geography, and then doing some kind of rating scale, trying to rate it based on strategic, operational, financial risk, low, medium, high. Many of you might have seen these types of risk assessments before. And now let's take a look at how we might look at things in Agile. So again, this is about really tying back to a strategic objective. And this is an illustrative example of something that's quite topical these days, but it might have to do with, do we pay all employees a fair, equitable wage? That's kind of a strategic risk. If somehow we weren't doing this and this was bubbled up as a concern or through whistleblower complaints or other avenues, this became an issue that turned out to be a concern for this organization. You have the risk of potentially hitting the front page of the newspaper with something like that, and nobody wants that. So we might design an audit that would go in and specifically look at this issue. It's a very specific item, and that's how we want Agile to be. We want it to be very focused on specific risks. Now, having said all that, we're not necessarily going to look at the entire payroll process. We might just be focused on the specific elements of that process that are giving rise to this potential risk. So we're going to perform an audit activity and an audit sprint that will maybe do some analytics around looking at people's pay and the roles and the positions that they have and some of the demographics to make sure that this risk is adequately addressed. Okay, so from an execution standpoint, in traditional audit, it's end-to-end process-based. And we have, sometimes we get into things like scope creep. Sometimes we can get bogged down in manager review of work and back and forth with auditees regarding issues. And there just really isn't the same level of transparency and collaboration in traditional methods. In Agile, as I've mentioned, we're definitely focused on specific risks. We're having that daily stand-up meeting that includes the auditees and management. We're purposefully making sure we avoid scope creep. And that's not to say that we don't take note of things that might be emerging risks that we learn about during an audit, but we don't necessarily address those in the particular sprint that we're working through. We will capture that and take it back to the audit backlog and deal with that potentially in another activity. Manager review is going to be real time, and we're going to be providing those insights back to our auditees through that report iteration process. And we may be able to, or we're going to strive to be able to produce insights on demand for our audit committee in case they ask for it. Okay, so just a quick comparison between some of the tools that we use in traditional DevOps, Agile, like the daily Scrum board, where you're going to have a backlog of stories. Again, this is going back to the concept of the features that an IT dev team might be trying to achieve for their end users. So they're going to have a story backlog of things that they need to do, what's been done, what are they currently working on, et cetera. So in Agile Audit, instead of stories, again, we're talking about risks. So we're going to have a storyboard that's going to be focused on risks. What risks have we addressed in the backlog? What are we doing? What have we done? And it's all about just making sure we constantly revisit that prioritization and we're focused on the right things. Okay, so when it comes to reporting, again, traditionally, we might have some reporting about the audit plan, status update. You might have some trending about issues. You might be reporting to this is for audit committees. You might be reporting to the audit committee only, 1 to 4 times a year, depending on the organization. And it's going to be a heavy lift oftentimes to produce a fancy report that looks very professional and glossy. So in Agile, we still want to obviously have very high quality work, very good information and professional looking documents, but we want to be able to do it in a way that we can provide those insights faster. So there are tools and templates out there that are designed for a more agile way of doing this. And so that we can potentially provide those insights on demand to our audit committee so that they can really see the value that the department is producing. Okay, and then as far as the audit reporting to the auditees and stakeholders management, we are going to be doing interim reporting with them every couple of weeks, every 1 to 2 weeks. In addition to daily Scrum activity, we're probably going to be putting something a little more structured in front of them just to make sure that the issues that are coming up during the audit are being discussed. They know what the audit team is finding. They understand what improvements need to be made. They understand what their management action plan should be. And again, it's a very collaborative discussion. So by the end of the audit, when we do a final report, there are no surprises. The audit report has, 90% of it is written during the audit itself, and producing that final report is really just more of a formality. Okay, let's launch this polling question. I think we got the orders flipped before. Okay, how often should the internal audit department be able to produce audit committee insight reports? Annual with some updates, every 6 months, once a quarter, on demand, or not sure. For those of you that have worked in audit or been involved in this process, I'm sure you can relate to situations where it can be quite taxing pulling together packages for audit committees. I'm sure some of you might have experienced that. Okay, so it looks like once a quarter is the most popular response here at 66%. We're actually looking for on demand. On demand is really the ideal frequency for audit committees, meaning if they come to the audit department and ask, how are things going? What are you seeing? We're able to get them something very rapidly, and we don't have to wait until the end of the quarter to deliver those insights. Okay, so we've already, I'm just a little conscious of the time here. I want to have time for Q&A. Internal audits report, we've really kind of talked about this, the board level reporting. We're certainly going to still do it. We want to be able to provide insights on demand, but we're going to be doing more formal report outs for that audit committee. And it will include things like what risks were addressed, what are some of the trends that are out there, what do we see, what are the root causes, what is management doing about it, and that's how we're going to deliver value back to our stakeholders at the audit committee and board level. Okay, so there's this concept of an agile audit maturity, and we don't expect people to overnight become experts in everything agile audit, right? It is a journey. And so you might start at basic levels and trend up towards more strategic or even adaptive levels. But you can think of it as, on a foundational level, building high performance teams, trying to implement methods that encourage collaboration and transparency. And then as you move forward up the scale, you're going to be doing a lot of that same type of thing, but also now you're maybe looking at ways to amp up the capabilities of your department through use of technology and data analytics. There are solutions out there associated with RPA. RGP has a solution called Power Audit that helps companies to automate control testing. So those types of capabilities and features are things that departments are looking for to make themselves more agile. And it is a process. So I also want to talk about, in terms of recommendations, how do people go about doing this? As I said, it can't really happen overnight. But the best ways to get started on something like this, to implement Agile Audit, is to start small and do activities in a pilot mode. So maybe you start with one audit or one area that you're auditing, or one team. Get them trained up, get them going, and get training, because you really need to understand the concepts of business agility first, as Toby mentioned in the beginning, but then taking those concepts and those principles and that mindset and really porting it over to audit and formalizing an approach. And you want to have buy-in at the top too. It always helps to get that to move forward. And as I mentioned, technology can be a helper as the department matures, as you continue on that journey. And the other thing is the concept of relentless improvement. So in Agile, it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to fail, because that's how people learn. And the whole Agile mindset and principles really embrace that thinking. So it's okay to try something. If it doesn't work as well as you want, you adapt, you adjust, and you pivot, and you do things differently, and you learn from your mistakes. And that's all absolutely acceptable. And really, that is a very good method to become better, is to try things out and see what's working and what fits in your environment. Okay, so you'll get this deck afterwards, but we did include some resources, some links to material on Agile Audit that are out there on the internet. So I would encourage you to take a look at these materials. A lot of good stuff out there on this topic. And now I think we're ready for questions. Bill, do we have anything in our Q&A that we'd like to take a look at?
Not as of yet.
Okay. Well, that's okay, because we have some questions we can take a look at here. Frequently asked questions. So Toby, feel free to chime in, and Bill too. But let's start with the first one. What can we do to make our audit universe more risk-based? So I touched on this earlier. I think it's really about thinking through the strategic risks to the organization and being comfortable with that whole concept of not necessarily auditing everything. And if you don't get to every corner of the company or the organization, you don't get to every process, that's okay. And if you think about risks associated with the process, it's okay if you don't audit the whole process. If parts of a process are not that risky, focus on the parts where you have risk. And that's something that is definitely a bit of a mindset shift for people in audit. And so they have to get comfortable with that as well. Toby, anything to add there?
One of the biggest things I've seen that works here is getting into, you had mentioned like looking at the financial statements, but look at your competitors' financial statements as well to see what they're calling out.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking not just for what does management know, but what do they don't know? What is it that they might have missed? So we start looking at competitor work to see what they've done, but also then just every single year, all of the big accounting firms, the IAA, ACFE, all of those different groups put out like the IAA is the pulse of audit. They do their on risk reporting now. They basically are calling out some of the things we need to be worried about for this year right now. So from the emerging risk side, that's probably one of the hardest areas to get our arms around because it's changing all the time. It's emerging. And by having these different resources, we can then go into those conversations with senior leadership, with director level individuals, and not just say, what are you worried about, but say, have you guys considered these things because these are what our competitors are looking at. This is what the industry is looking at. So what do you guys think about these areas?
And
Yeah.
I would add, be prepared to reprioritize it at every iteration, because as new risks emerge, you're going to need to, shift those ones that are now emerging and could be in high focus for you sooner into your audit plans, right? So I would get that habit of reprioritizing by risk as part of your normal course of business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's take a look at the second one, which we may have partially answered already. What about the entities and processes that are not being touched by internal audit? And I would say to this that it's okay if internal audit doesn't touch everything as we discussed, because it may not be high enough on the risk assessment. But I would say that internal audit should also have visibility or understanding of how entities and processes that they're not looking at are being touched by other parts of the organization, such as compliance, such as risk and control, self-assessment, procedures, and things of that nature, if there's a question. So internal audit, every internal audit department, just like every function or department, has budget restraints. So you can't everybody wants more money to hire more people, to implement more technology and all these things. We all would like to be able to do more, but there are limitations. So you really need to start with the top risks and work your way down. But if there are things you can't get to, internal audit really should have some visibility, or at least an understanding through the risk assessment of how, what other parts of the organization are accountable for those areas, and what are they doing to address risks if internal audit can't get to it. Toby, anything to add on that?
Ian mentioned I'm always looking for a tool. And so this is one of the prime cases where I've found tools help. There's something that's out that's called a risk mapping tools, where you're looking at those bigger risks in the organization. So you could you've probably captured them in your assessment, but lay them out and then just say who else might have looked at it. And start to then build out a matrix to understand by risk, who's looking at what, because we're not the only game in town. There's going to be other audit teams. There's going to be the compliance folks. There's all the second line. There's first line management doing self-assessments. So when you look at it by a risk, understanding what the total coverage is on an area helps us to reprioritize them, not just by risk, but also by coverage. To say, I've got a high risk area, it's not very well covered. I've got a medium area risk that's well covered. I'm not going to bother with the medium risk. I'm going to focus all my attention here, because then we don't just blow it off. We're not just saying, so I don't have the resources to look at it. We're saying there's another group that's doing something here. And so I'm going to be able to allow management to focus on that activity instead of it being all on audit.
Yeah, well said. We just have a couple minutes left, but the third FAQ here is, how should my IA department begin the transformation to be more agile? Well, I'm just going to go back to the slide we had up a minute ago on the, one second, there we go. Our recommendations, again, it's really about starting out in a pilot mode. You've got to take it in sizable chunks and seek the advice of professionals as well where needed. Training, a lot of outside organizations provide training on Agile and Agile Audit, and have tools and templates and approaches that help people get started with this. So we certainly would encourage people to explore pivoting to be more agile in internal audit by using some of the principles and approaches we talked about today. But again, you've got to take it in chunks and start small, and focus on that relentless improvement overall as you work through the journey.
Hey guys, we've got a question out there. With IIA's independent quality assessments, have you seen IA shops experience negative assessments as a result of adopting this new Agile auditing approach?
Yeah, I can give you the high level answer and then let Ian give you something more specific, because I know he's dealt with this closely. Just to tell you, the way that this lines up to the standards is perfect. Whenever you start to look at how the standards actually require us to do different activities, even things about reporting, there's actually no standard that says you have to produce a report. It's all about communication, which is one of those key tenets inside of Agile. And so it's not something that you would ever receive a negative assessment for going agile. You're still addressing risk, you're still maintaining communication, all those pieces are there. But I think, Ian, didn't you actually have this pop up in a QA recently?
I did, Toby. I performed an external quality assessment for a company in Q4 last year, and they had adopted Agile audit methodology just about a year ago. So it was really their first year of implementing Agile. And as part of that external quality assessment, we do surveys and interview executives and audit committee, the audit committee chair. And the feedback was overwhelmingly positive that the Agile approach had been really successful in the collaboration aspects that I mentioned. The management folks felt like the buy-in was fantastic from their standpoint. The audit committee liked what they were getting. So it was deemed to be highly productive overall. And of course, they still complied with all the standards, as you said. Agile is not about avoiding compliance with any standards. There's certainly ways to make sure that you are agile and doing things in a more productive way and collaborative way using these approaches, and you're able to comply with all the standards. So it's really, and part of QAR is really about that, improvement program, right? QAIP, Quality Assessment and Improvement Program, is really what you're looking at in an external quality assessment. And the IP piece of it, the improvement program, is very closely linked to Agile thinking and Agile methodologies and trying to deliver those insights and value that we talked about. Okay. Any other questions, Bill?
I think that's it.
Okay, well, looks like we're at time here. So thanks, everyone. I appreciate your time and attention, and we hope you enjoyed this, and feel free to reach out to us. I believe we have our contact information in the deck, and you'll be getting a copy of this as well. So enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you very much.